Hey everyone, Tankenstein here. In this video, I'll be going over my top 5 most disliked ground vehicles in all of War Thunder. This is part of a series of 4 videos where I'll be releasing my top 5 liked and disliked tanks and planes as part of my 25,000 subscriber celebration. Thank you all so much for helping me reach that mark. I know I'm already at 26,000 plus subs, but that's because a history video I made a few months ago about the YB-40, basically a B-17 that was turned into a gunship, gained a ton of views, and thus I gained a ton of subscribers at an unexpectedly high rate, almost right when I hit 25,000 subs. I know this video right here will stir a lot of opinions, so let me know what you guys would change in the comments below, or if you totally agree or disagree with my list. Now, that said, to start, let's go over some ground rules. First, this will span all nations, ranks, and BRs outside of Reserve and 1.0 BR. It will also include regular tech tree vehicles only, as premium and event vehicles might not be accessible to everyone for one reason or another. This list's considerations will include not just tanks, but also tank destroyers, SPAAs, IFVs, and more. Also bear in mind that I don't necessarily find these vehicles to be bad unless I specifically say so, as I believe that all vehicles are basically good or bad depending on who's operating them. To be honest, I had a tough time coming up with the vehicles for this list, as I like almost every single tank in game. In some ways, this video is like a mini critique of the vehicles on this list. Also, it's funny because while I was recording the gameplay for this video to show the tanks I strongly dislike, I actually did decently with almost all of them. So it might show that I've gotten better over the last few months, or that these tanks aren't quite as bad as I thought they were. Either way, let's get to number 5. And so to start it off, number 5 again, the IS-2. This is gonna draw a ton of heat because a ton of people love the IS-2, but guess what guys, it is just not for me. It has a ridiculous reload time of between 20 and 27 seconds depending on crew skill. Aside from that ridiculous reload, it has the following features that I just genuinely dislike. It's got a poor top speed, poor turret traverse, no top mounted HMG or LMG, which is a common feature of vehicles on this list. The armor layout is the same pretty much as the IS-1, though this was largely rectified with the 1944 model for the IS-2, as this was the main production version. It also has an absolutely awful gun depression that makes cresting hills a dangerous task, especially considering the slow speed in which this tank moves over said hills. It also gets in a ton of up tiers and only has a 4-man crew, which is especially poor considering that this is a heavy tank. One could easily make the case that the armor pen plus explosive charge that this tank carries makes it an amazing vehicle, but for me at least, its reload takes it away from being an otherwise great tank and turns it into mush. I strongly prefer faster firing cannons or even mid-level reloads in the low tens of seconds at most, with smaller, more lightly armored vehicles. Heck, that's not even a requirement. I love the Tiger II in all of its forms, and that's a much heavier tank with a better pen, much better reload, even on the 10.5, and a still great amount of explosive filler. In short, the base level IS-2 is for me a stinker. It, for my style of play at least, does not work so well, as I prefer to move and get into brawls, or at least be able to exploit somewhat quick follow-up shots, especially before my enemy repairs and is able to move away from danger. And again, a quick reminder, this list is not at all saying that these tanks are awful, unless of course I say so, but rather that they just don't mesh with my style of play, so bear that in mind and spare me the hate if that's what you guys think that this video is all about. For my number 4 most disliked tank, then this one might rub a few people the wrong way, but I think that this one is a lot more in agreement with a lot of other people than the IS-2, and that's the PVKV-2, the Panzerkennenwagen whatever it is 2. As for why I dislike it, it is a huge target, it's very lightly armored, has mediocre turret traverse, a poor reload time, sluggish traverse speed, again, it's a common theme on most of the tanks in this list, no roof mounted HMG or even an LMG, but it does have a very good cannon. A big reason why I dislike this vehicle is because, much like some of the other TDs on this list, it's just very lightly armored, can't really stand up to too much of a hit. It's just a very one-sided weapon, right? I'm more of an overall sort of vehicle sort of person, like a Panther tank. Even a Tiger tank is a much better overall vehicle, in my opinion, than the PVKV-2, and it's just a really good tank for someone who likes to snipe, and that's not me. You know, I really like the Tiger II because I can snipe and then move in, but with the PVKV-2, I pretty much always have to stand on the back lines, except in the gameplay that I have, and you'll be seeing in the gameplay for this video. For whatever reason, I just did pretty darn well tonight semi pretty much with every single vehicle here. That does not change the fact that I dislike them very much. But again, the PVK V2 is a very strong tank. It has an excellent cannon. It can pretty much not only just pen, but one-shot almost every single tank that it fights around its BR. So even up through 5.0 BR, I mean, this thing is an absolute killer. But again, with the huge target, the huge size of it, the fact that it's lightly armored, it has a mediocre turret traverse, and a poor reload time, those really get it for me. But the sluggish movement speed, being that this is on a really low-level chassis, those really seal the deal for this being my number 4 on this list. Now for number 3, and this is one that I think a lot of people are going to agree with, the PT-76B. To put it simply, a 76mm Heat FS shell is too small to reliably do post-pen damage, especially an early Heat FS shell in a tank that was developed in the 1950s. As such, though it can penetrate a good amount of armor for not only a shell of its size and a tank of this BR, the PT-76B, otherwise known as the PTS-D76, and forgive me, I'm not making fun of PTSD, but rather this tank to show how awful it is, it typically takes numerous well-placed shots to kill the tank, all while having little to no armor to protect from a reprisal shot against you. It can and will die to even 50 cals, of which are on most American tanks around this BR, as well as some foreign tanks. Heck, it can't even defend against 50 cals from the front unless, of course, you are angled. In addition, though its night vision seems like a cool feature, it is totally unusable unless playing in a lineup with much higher BR vehicles, as night matches don't become prominent until around 8.0 BR, which if you're playing 8.0 BR with a PT-76B, you're gonna have a bad time. So in short, I dislike this tank for the following reasons. It's got a low velocity Heat FS shell, which makes longer range shots fairly difficult. It's got an awful APHE shell that only has 98mm of armor pen at best, which is equal to tanks about 2 full BRs lower. It also has poor speed. It's got a mediocre reload for a shell this weak. It's got a mediocre turret traverse. It has one of the worst stock grinds in game due to the awful stock shell, an APCR shell that it's stuck with, and it also has no roof mounted LMG. But it does have a stabilizer, which is really cool at this BR. Oh, and a quick fact, being that I just hit again my 25,000 subs, and this is part of the I guess the celebration, so to speak. My original name that I really wanted after my initial Wild and Woolly Gaming was to be Dr. Funkenstein, but of course that did not happen because there is a Parliament Funkadelic song with that name. Check it out if you like. I like funk music, and I thought it was pretty cool. And now for the number 2 on this list, and initially this was going to be my number 1 tank on this list, but to be honest with you guys, after playing it and after playing the number 2 on this list, I cannot have this as the number 1. So my number 2 is the SAU-40. And again, before this list, before I even came up with this video, I hated this tank to a fault, but that's also because I didn't play the number 2 all too much until this video. Now, the SAU-40 being my number 2 is awful in every single way outside of its cannon with its armor pen. It has mediocre armor thickness, though it is curved in the typical fashion of French tanks designed in the 1930s, and it can help to deflect shells that don't hit at a 90-degree angle. It also is very slow and has poor agility. It's only got a 3-man crew. The LMG turret on top is poorly armored and has a crew member standing in the middle of it, making this a very easy way to destroy the SAU-40. And finally, it has extremely limited cannon traverse. Now it's funny, and this is part of my script, but I've mentioned it before, as I was using this tank so I could capture gameplay for this video, I was wrecking the enemy team pretty bad, at least relative to how I normally perform with this tank. Now I think that this is for 2 reasons. For one, the map I got twice in a row, Sinai, gave me enough gameplay for this video, and it's also an awesome map for this tank, and is the only map that I've ever used this tank on and have been successful. And 2, because I've gotten better since the last time I've played this tank, probably a little bit over a year ago. In short, however, this is still a bad vehicle, and if it wasn't for me being able to seal club at will due to the experience gap between me and most low BR players, which I try not to do very often, the lowest BRs I come down to are around 4 to 5 typically, unless I'm making a video, I suspect that I would be able to only get around a third of the kills that I had again if I was facing equal experienced enemies. Seriously, all of the tanks that bounced off the hull only needed to aim a little bit higher in order to hit my MG turret, and they would have killed me easily. This is a terrible tank, and really, like I said, if it wasn't for the number 1 spot, this would be my number 1 spot easily, but the number 1 spot, whoa. it's bad. But before we get into the number 1 spot, let's give some honorable mentions, and first we have the Stirrer Emil. Now this is a bit counterintuitive, but I feel like this kind of deserves to be mentioned, and to be honest, this wasn't on my radar until Fly Daily had mentioned it a few months back. In short, this TD keeps getting down tiered, or at least has the BR lowered. That isn't making it any better. Its core issues are that it has a slow firing cannon and no armor, or at least very little armor, which are two things that are not remedied by decreasing its BR. For example, its massive 200+ millimeters of armor pen oftentimes overpens enemies around this BR with a long 15 to 20 second reload, along with a high profile, which makes this a very easy vehicle to kill, especially when you have the flak bus just sitting there around the same BR, which is a much more balanced vehicle. That's again something you're going to see a lot in this list, or something you've probably seen a lot in this list. There are not many balanced vehicles. I'm a big fan of balanced vehicles. But personally, I've had some great moments with the Stirrer Emil, but it is such a tough to place vehicle insofar as BR is concerned that I could either love or hate this vehicle, all depending on who I'm facing. And then for my second and final honorable mention, there won't be any others, is the M60A2. Now this is the Starship as it's known because of its turret and because of the fact that it can fire special ATGMs. Now this is at a BR in which most tanks are getting faster, being 8.0 BR. And this is just a simply slower version of the M60 with over 5 tons of weight added to, again, the standard M60 with no additional engine power to show for it. In all, while the cannon, for me at least, is sometimes okay, it just doesn't feel all too great. So your only options are a low velocity heat shell with around a 15-second reload. Again, I really do not like long reloads, or an ATGM that has an extremely difficult time penning any sort of ERA armor, but of course is pretty darn good against non-ERA armor. While this is not a terrible tank, the offensive capabilities of this tank, in my experience with it, just don't mesh all too well with how I like to play War Thunder. I like to have more of an active role in a match than, again, in my experience, the M60A2 can provide. And for number 1, the Archer. This is a British 2.7, currently 2.7 BR TD. Now, there are numerous TDs on this list, and the more I look at this list, the more I realize that I just do not like mid to low BR TD gameplay in War Thunder. The Archer, to me at least, exemplifies this dislike, and it is literally an backwards TD. It's insane. If it weren't for the fact that you literally had to drive pretty much in reverse, at least relative to the cannon, I feel like this would be an amazing tank destroyer, as an amazing cannon, especially for its BR, and a low profile, at least relatively speaking. The lack of armor, awful mobility when it comes to aiming the cannon, being that you only have around a 4 km/h top speed in reverse, which is the only way that you can move when you're trying to aim the cannon, as well as some other negatives like the fact that this does not have an LMG or an HMG. With all these considered, it just means that this is too poor of a performer for me to enjoy, at least in the way that I play. If you're a sniper, this is a great vehicle. If not, like me, this is not a great vehicle. It's crazy too, because if the cannon was facing the way that it drives when moving forward, I'd say that this is easily a 4.0-ish BR TD, and is, as far as I know, the only vehicle in all of War Thunder that is likely this affected by reverse versus forward speed. Again, if it weren't for this, it'd be one of my favorite TDs in game. But unless you're sniping, like I said before, which is something I just simply do not like to do, at least not around these BRs, then you're typically not going to do well with this vehicle. In short, this vehicle represents my antithesis in terms of gameplay. Might be amazing for some people, but definitely not for me. And one final note, and let me know if I'm wrong in the comments below, because I'm sure there will be a lot of comments. This vehicle has absolutely no offensive armament when moving forward. Go figure that. This has got to be the only tank in all of War Thunder with no offensive armament moving forward. It's ridiculous. Or rather, tank destroyer, as some of these are tank destroyers. I just kind of blanket to find them as tanks, even though technically speaking and in-game they are listed as tank destroyers. But either way, thank you so much for watching, everyone. Please, of course, like, comment, subscribe. You guys know the dealio. I want to hear what your opinions are about this video, because of course this is my first of a likely 4-part series about the vehicles I really dislike and like on War Thunder. Let me know in the comments below if you want me to come out with my like video for my tanks, so my top 5 tanks for Saturday, or some sort of plane video, whether it's a like or dislike video for my top or bottom 5 planes in War Thunder for this coming Saturday. But either way, thanks again for watching, everyone. Please like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for being with me for these 25,000 subs, whether you just joined me a few minutes ago, a few seconds ago, or you've been with me for weeks, months, or over a year or two. So it all matters, and I will, well, always appreciate it. But thanks again. I've said it probably a million times, and I'll see you all on the other side. Take care, everyone.